Welcome to Live Adult Religious Education through the Orthodox Christian Network, a ministry of the Greek Orthodox Church of St. George. I'm Michael Haldis. We're back after a little hiatus, had some unforeseen events last week that we had to cancel, but we are back today. And some of you in the room that I just was explaining what was going on, I'll kind of laugh at this selection of topic on my part. It's calling it the beauty and elusiveness of peace and joy. When I first started putting this together, I didn't realize shortly thereafter my peace and joy were about to be shattered. So I was like, I gotta be careful what topics I prey upon and pick. But I suspect, like we're talking about, in any given time in life, we're always trying to reclaim our peace and joy or strive for it because something is going on. So really what I wanted to do today is just have a discussion, talk about beauty, prayer, God's will as it relates to having the peace and joy of the Lord. And I wrote, sometimes when I put these together, I'll put some notes down, or sometimes I'll just hear phrases in my head and I'll just jot down something. So as I was putting this together a couple of weeks ago, I wrote this. I said, you ever notice that when someone dies, that some people will say he or she is at peace? And sometimes this makes sense if they've had a particularly rough life or, a rough ending. But people tend to say it anyway, right? They say it no matter what, depending. And I thought to myself, does this mean that living life by definition means we're always lacking peace, right? It's that we never, is this an acknowledgement that everybody, religious or secular, that life is rough and full of all kinds of warfare, both real war without, tough situations in life, warfare and turmoil within. So I guess, my first question to everybody, or first discussion piece is there such a thing as an attainment of true peace on this side of the grave? And is anyone here in a place of perfect contentment at the moment, or has
no?
No. Neither me with
You guys have it.
Yeah.
I think the idea, the phrase to pursue peace. I mean, we have it in the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
the pursuit of this happiness and so on. If pursuit, which is energetic and forceful, and get out of my way, you're between me and my peace, you've already lost it.
Right.
So it is.
That's called war.
So I think it is extremely difficult to obtain. I hate to say this, but when I met the Dalai Lama, it really just sounds like I'm dropping names. I'm so sorry. I met the Dalai Lama many years ago when I was in Dharamsala, and I said to him afterward, he had a lecture, and this wonderful man, just very accessible, and I said to him, how do you find peace? And he said, you don't find it. Be still. It will come to you. The being still part is what's.
Yeah, Psalm 45 or 46, depending on which Bible translation you're looking at. But if you read the whole Psalm, because that's towards the end of the Psalm, I think we talked about this before, but if you read the whole Psalm, starting in the beginning, there's a lot of turbulence, right? There's a lot of language of that, struggle until it gets to be still and know that I'm God. Sila.
But isn't peace and joy almost like going back to our ancestors before Christ, like the Platonic ideal almost, where in your mind is probably more perfect than it actually is in our earthly reality?
Yeah, maybe. Although as I was thinking about this, and obviously, who do we always look to for our answers? Christ, right? So I started looking at some of the things that Christ said, and it would seem that he believed that we could attain a large measure of peace here, as the kingdom breaks through here and now, right? The kingdom is both a present and a future state. And certainly some of the saints seem to have been at a lot of peace no matter what. Many could come to mind, but I think of the writings of Elder Thaddeus, who just, who talked about, my mind's escaped me, but he he wrote a lot about peace, the peace of mind. And I think there are some things, I think I don't know if we'll ever attain a perfect peace, unless some of us in this room become saints. I mean, not as in believers, but as in saints, achieving a high level of spiritual growth where we venerate. But Christ, I could pick many things, but I just, to continue discussion, he said, John 16:33, remember he said, these things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world. And then he said before that, my peace I leave you, my peace I give you, not as the world gives you, do I give you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. So I started thinking, maybe afraid and fear. There's a lot of language about fear not, don't be afraid. There seems to be so much of peace or lack thereof associated with the things we fear. So I'll throw that out as for comment, discussion point. I think there's a large tie to what we fear, or the fear, or imagined or real fears, to our lack of peace. I see some heads shaking. Anybody want to comment on that?
Think about soldiers going into Babylon,
Coming in.
and they seem quietly determined. Are they at peace? I mean, knowing what they're going to be doing shortly? But it just seems so contradictory.
Yeah.
I mean, who in their right mind would run to be the president of any large country like the United States or France or anything? Because you're going to,
or church parish.
Hopefully, you want to do some good, but that's just stepping into nothing but turbulence and upheaval.
But that's always there. That's always there. You just got to accept it.
But then are you at peace?
If you're strong enough to, like a duck, let water roll off your back, you'll never make everybody happy.
Well, Christ did say in Matthew 10:28, he did talk about fear. He said, don't fear those who can kill the body. Fear him, capital H, who can put both body and soul into hell, right? Something like that. I'm misquoting a little bit, but the point was fear God, not fear but that reverence, that veneration, focus on God. Don't focus on what the world can do to you. And that's why I think a lot of, rightly so, but a lot of our lack of peace comes from our fear of certain outcomes, or a lot of anxiety. Let's face it. Whether I don't know. I know there's smarter people in here about physiology and biology than I am. I don't know which chicken or egg, but a lot of anxiety. I guess there's some chemical in its roots, but a lot of anxiety is about imagined fears that actually never happen. Right? We worry about things that don't happen, but then when things do happen, it's like, oh, I'm surprised this happened. It's, not all the time, but a lot of it is. We worry about all kinds of things. So I just think there's a lot in the Bible. There's so much language about fear and don't fear. I think a lot of our lack of peace comes from these fears. So it would suggest to me that the task of what Christ says, the peace I give you, being able to receive that peace, has a lot with our spiritual growth to get past certain fears.
Well, you see that in liturgy too, because before communion, the hymn, lay aside the cares of this life.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But it really does take growth on our part to be able to frame our understanding in that is precious and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and all the ups and downs that this life is. It's not the complete story.
Yeah.
But that's hard, isn't it?
Yes.
It's easy to talk about intellectually, but when it really comes to where the rubber meets the road and really believing and living that way, who finds it hard or has found it hard? Right? I should expect every hand to go up or some, yeah.
We basically, I think what's being said here is that we need, if God's going to give us, say, don't be worried, don't be concerned. It's having the faith in Him that He's in control. We have to come to terms But when all is said and done, He is in control. If we really believe that as Christians and live our life that way.
All true. And I think the what's interesting is probably worth the real discussion is how does one get there? I think we can acknowledge that these are all true, but how do we actually?
Well, that's why you put prayer in that title, because that's
Mhm.
that's the key. And we're coming up, to we started today, with Sunday the Publican Prayer Saints, and we'll have one of my favorite saints, Saint Mary, of Egypt, who, as I understand it, only took communion once.
I think it was once, maybe twice. I think once though. I think once is
You're talking
Yeah.
about Mary.
Mayor of Egypt. Yeah,
Yeah, that was in the desert.
in the desert
Right.
once.
Yeah.
Is
The year before she died, and then the priest was coming back again.
right. He was coming back to bring it to her. That's right. Yeah.
Second communion, or maybe another communion, and he found her guarded by the lion, already passed away.
Yeah, I keep an icon of her on my wall when I do my morning prayers and I go to the different saints I pray to. I always pray for her to intercede for anybody that's really struggling with sexual related sins. But more important than that, I think for her is when you see someone who fell so low becoming a saint and being someone that the church places in such a important place in the calendar, right? The last Sunday before Holy Week, you not only see the church's understanding and compassion, which we actually deny each other a lot, right? And you also see the church, because the church is Christ, right? We're all imagers, right? Like image and likeness, and God works through us. We always say, well, why don't God do this? Not necessarily people in the room, but really it's us. He's working through us. You see there also the church's commitment and understanding to the rehabilitation of the person, not the punitive. So to me, that's why I think she's such an important saint for so many reasons to acknowledge and also teach correctly too. We can't.
Well,
I want to teach the young people, don't do this. It's more elevating.
yeah, and her metamorphosis, for lack of a better term, her change through her prayer and asking for forgiveness, it shows us a potential, one of many different pathways that the church has. It's not the only pathway, but it's certainly one of them. And that's, I think, the key to focus on is to find, we're all different. And so we're going to find our own unique pathways, to Christ. I mean, you have to go through Christ. But if you look at the saints, they'll have their own story and how they came to be. And I know for myself, I find some, relief in that it's not hard and fast.
One size fits all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's one thing that's I've said before. It's empirically evident that God delights in variety, right? Because there's so I mean,
But I think the key to this, or the key to prayer, is having that personal relationship with Christ. Because without that, to me, prayer isn't effective.
yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. I think you're right. Because I'm reading here a quote I put by Saint Seraphim of Sarov, where we're not to be our own executioners. So that's one thing. It's you talked about like Saint Mary, whatever. So many saints could have done that. We can all do that. That's not really the purpose of prayer. So Paul says in Philippians 4:6-7, he said, be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. So that's to use an overused phrase. Let's unpack that a little. Oh, I hate that. I just actually use it on a podcast. I don't know how to say it any different. So prayer by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. And you said about relationships. I think it's safe to say there's a certain way how we pray. Not that it's formulaic, but there's a certain orientation of our heart, a certain way we understand how we approach prayer is really important to really enter into prayer the right way, right being defined by the most healthy way for us, right? Because God allows us to stumble for our growth and whatever. And sometimes we can pray not in a very effective way for a while until we come to the realization that we should be praying differently. So who wants to talk about that or try to comment about what Paul's saying there, right? Prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. I have some thoughts about that, but again, there's not one right answer here, one right explanation. There's
If we believe that Christ is, God is in control of our lives, God has a plan for us, God is all powerful, then whatever He sets us, we should find a way to be thankful, because there's a reason that we're dealing with whatever struggles we have, and there's a way through it, and that's through Christ.
Yeah.
So that brings us back to peace. That brings us a peace that whatever is going on, there's an all-powerful God over us.
loving
And
God.
that peace only comes through Christ. And it surpasses anything I can understand about what I'm dealing with.
Yeah, I like that, because I think it's important that he says, prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. I think many of us, without thinking it through too much, would maybe look at some circumstances and pray for something to help within that circumstance, but maybe leaving out the thankful part. Or we thank God, but we're not really there yet. We just know I'm supposed to thank you. Thank you for this circumstance, but you're not really thankful for it yet for real. Meaning that I think it takes growth sometimes on our part to realize that whatever comes our way, I mean, probably short of the most horrible tragedies, which is a whole different discussion. It takes a whole different time to realize. But most things within the bell curve of life, most things that come our way are, if we can react to them in a sense of, okay, thank you, Lord, there's some growth in this for me, some loving purpose that I can't fathom and I don't understand, but I'm going to trust you in it. And then my job is daily bread. I need to execute this day in the service of others as best I can. Something like that is, I think.
But that's part of having a relationship.
Exactly.
Because, and I've said this many times in this room, but I didn't fully comprehend that until, as a young high schooler, reading this book, The Little World of Don Camillo. And it's about Italy after World War II, and there's a Catholic priest, and they're battling the communists, and he's always, how a Catholic altar is built, there's always a crucifix with Christ on the cross behind it, and he's having these it's like he's having a conversation with Christ, as this priest, in a little audio, battles what he perceives to be evil in the communists. And I'm not gonna make a political comment, but that's when I realized that without that personal relationship with Christ and praying, as correctly as you can or as you're capable of, that there's no gain there without that personal relationship. And that it's like any other relationship, it takes effort. If you don't put the effort into it, then the relationship's still going to fail.
I want to say something real quick. It's on topic. I'm getting a lot of comments about praying for the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and apparently, I'm just reading the comments for those of you that are writing them. There's executions and terrible things going on over there. Talk about lack of peace. So they're asking for prayer and to have their voice be heard. So let's lift up the Ethiopian Church in prayer, and lift up in prayer all those that are going through these things, these horrible things, martyrdom, and whatever is going on over there. So I think the relationship that takes a while to get to sometimes, meaning that I don't know if any of us are there, maybe some of you are, where we actually are seeking God purely to be in his presence, be in Christ's presence in relationship. I think you do. My experience has been, and my own personal and sharing, just listening to those of others, you do see that where people just have experienced a peace and joy in God enough to seek him for that. And they take some of the horrible things that come in their life on a daily basis a little in stride as they try to do their best within them, but their focus has shifted from helping me to seeking him, right? And I was reading as I was looking about researching this a little about why we struggle to pray. One priest was saying that as he got older, he stopped really asking God for things because like God knows this anyway, and he just started praying more to how to help others, right? And just so I think there's an evolution in our growth, obviously, in our prayer life where we get to different places and then we help others that are in a place that we recognize where we once were, help shepherd them to that place and why somebody's shepherding us. And that's, I think, how Christ wants the body to work, right? We're all different places at different times. That's
You can also
Christianity.
tell, yeah.
It's exactly what it is. Yeah.
At the risk of talking too much.
No, you have to be fine. That's my job. That's my failing, I mean.
I mean, one person that, I don't know, there are people that you meet in life's highway that you can just tell they're of God or of Christ.
Yeah.
And
They got the glow to them.
Right.
Yeah.
one of the people that does, to me, is our former Archbishop. Because if you ever had a chance to have a conversation with, Archbishop Demetrius, just in the way he talks, in his demeanor, you could just tell he was a man of God.
Said that.
I only got to meet him. I don't speak enough Greek, but I was here for the YL conference when then Patriarch Demetrius was here. And he had a similar demeanor. And I haven't had the pleasure to meet before me, so I don't know. I've heard him speak, but it's a little hard for me.
He's
to
very
gauge.
authoritarian. He has a very spiritual authority to him. I don't know if you found that when we were over there.
But you can just
I'm
tell
a
when
good
people
way.
are of God. They have, like you say, this glow in their voice and their being. You just feel God and Christ within them, and that's
It's
when I look at
inspiring.
that. When I look at that, I go, well, that's what I attain to be. I fail, but I figure that's what I attain to be, because God, Christ just flows out of them, and I'm like, that's what I want.
Father Maximus, our friend Father Maximus of the OCA Church, I remember asking him one time about the Holy Spirit because he's filled with it, and he's so humble. He doesn't see himself that way, so it's wonderful to talk to him. But I asked him, who is he? And he brought, who he's filled with it. He brought up Archbishop Demetrius, and I kind of felt sad for Archbishop because he had to do the job of running the church up there, and you get pulled away from your life of prayer so much. Because if you ever read his book on prayer, it's a beautiful book. But he said that about him, and it was funny to me to hear somebody so filled with the Holy Spirit humbly saying, "This one has it," and that's kind of the key, right? You really to get to that place of humility. It's very difficult, right? Because I don't mean humility in terms of stop bragging about yourself or that kind of stuff, but to really get to where you're not self-involved or thinking less about yourself. And I think who said it earlier about instead of about me, about him. I forget, but somebody said it really nicely. But it's getting to that place where your mind's not on yourself. It's like you really are seeking prayer like this, not like this. And it's hard. I think
Not keeping score.
yeah, and I think about Paul. I had that when I went to Paul's church over in Rome. I had I had a very spiritual experience, and something changed in my own thoughts to Paul because I used to read. Well, I still read obviously the New Testament. When I would read Paul before, I thought, Paul's really wise and stuff. I don't know if I like to hang out with him. He's in your face. But then I realized, okay, Michael, you're stupid because he was just so filled with love, right? That he was willing to put himself out there to do whatever it took to help. Because he said in Romans 9:3, he said, I'd rather be, what did he say? I can't find my note. But he said something to the effect of he'd rather be in hell for the sake of the people he loved that to find Christ, right? I mean, that's how the depth, how he went. So when he says, I've learned in whatever state I am to be content, sometimes I'd read that a million times, but then I really thought about it. Because I think when you're in crisis yourself, it just depends on where you're at in life. You see and hear things differently. I thought to myself, put some notes down here. Paul didn't have bills to pay. husband or wife nagging at him, lousy boss. He just had to avoid more beatings, more whippings, more poisonings, more stonings.
We could all do that, yeah.
Just
Right.
that, So I thought to myself, okay. But yet he writes about peace that in a way that we all are convicted and we can feel the peace he's talking about, even if we haven't fully attained it. But you can tell that this is his true experience. It speaks to our hearts. I'm like, wow.
You asked about peace before,
Mhm.
how to attain it. But peace is one of the fruits of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so in Galatians, and let me get this right because I always say this, it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And the things this is why I say that God definitely wrote the scripture, because no way could somebody have gotten love, joy, peace just intact like that, because love and self-control, or love begins, self-control ends. You cannot have any of these without love and without self-control.
Yeah, and some English translations actually put a colon after love, as if love is not first. It's like it's first because everything flows from it. So it's just another interesting way to maybe understand that scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and self-control.
That's where peace comes into play.
And self-control. How do we get self-control? It's not through willpower, because that fails, right? It's through dying to self. It's through abdication of self. It's through getting to not a forced state, but a natural state where your heart immediately is focused on the other and not yourself. It's not neglect. It's actually self-care in its highest form, right? Because the more you love, and we could actually technically end it there, just love. All the rest, we could.
I like the quote though about Paul. Saying he's willing to go to hell if it saved everybody else with everything.
It's Romans 9:3. I didn't write it down. I had it in my head, so I butchered it. But
that's okay. I mean, but it reminds me of being in college many moons ago and reading Faust, and then we had to write on it. And of course, I dilly-dally till the night before.
Imagine that.
Quote human nature.
And I'm sitting here trying to figure out what am I going to write, and then I'm in my dorm room and listening to the radio, and this song by Charlie Daniels comes on. The devil went down.
That's a great song. I love that song. Looking for a soul to steal.
Yeah, and so with some credit to that, after reading it, my mind just took, and I started off with borrowing from him that the devil came down to Vandy and he was behind, because he was way behind, and he came to me and he could see that I was devout and might be turned about. If I remember this poem I wrote to this day, if tempted to strike, fall as evil might. I thought and thought and thought about the devil's request, and at his behest, I don't care if I'm damned to eternity. And it took me forever. I stayed up till like 3 a.m. to find a word to rhyme with eternity, going through a thesaurus.
The pleasure and pain of poetry. Get that exact word.
Yeah. I said, I don't care if I'm damned for eternity, as long as I create amongst all forever, consanguinity. It took me a long time to find that one word. Consanguinity. It's like blood relations. And so that really is, when you said that Paul said that.
I actually found the quote. And actually, that's a poem that for the highly educated, because most are like, consanguinity, what's that? Boy, when you say that, I think of, boy, let me tell you what did you devil jumped up on a hickory stump?
Yeah.
So the quote, Romans 9:3, I did write it down, actually. For I wish that I myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my countrymen, according to the flesh. So remember Paul would say, I long to depart and be with Christ. So for him to say, accursed from Christ, that just shows the depth of the pain he had for the love of his people, really, the ones he was preaching to. So let's talk about love a little bit. Maria, you brought that up. So 1 John 4:18, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves torment. But he who fears has not been made perfect in love. Well, none of us are made perfect in love yet, because we have fears. But that's why getting back to earlier, it's the thing that holds us back from peace is fear. And the way we overcome fear is we learn to love better. And the way we learn to love better is we learn to pray better, pray rightly. Rightly, not as in like legal, check the box, but with the
Because all prayer is correct.
yes, exactly.
No matter what. No, all I remember is when
It's all accepted.
I went to confession one time, I said, I just can't pray. I don't know what it is, Father. I just can't pray. And he said to me, what you need to do is you need to set time aside and just do it.
Yeah.
And he gave me the times, and I went ahead and I did it. And the more I did it, the more I actually began to get into the prayer and start to learn myself, different things. So I think that all prayer is correct, because I think the shortest prayer in the Bible is Lord. That's all that all Paul said was, he got on one knee,
Lord. Yeah, all prayer is acceptable to God. So when we use right and wrong, correct and incorrect, we don't mean it like in that sense. It's more of what is healthy, beneficial, right? And of course, the Lord lets us work through it because he knows us better than we know ourselves, and he knows the stumbles we need to go through. And that's why, I'm convinced the older I get, I'm just convinced that the self, the ego, is so detrimental to us because, what do? We think we're doing the right thing in our piety. We become what Saint Seraphim said. We become our self-judgers, our self-executioners, right? I should be better than this. No, you shouldn't. Wherever you are right now, that's what you should be, because that's where you are. The rest of it's nonsense, right? And even like my wife and I were talking last night because of what she's going through, and she started doing the typical thing, as you might imagine. I should have done this. I should have done that. I'm like, stop. I said, that is the devil whispering in your ear, just debilitating thoughts. You must focus. I said, first of all, and I said it gently, and we all fall into this. I said, you're making it about yourself, right? We all make things about ourselves because we want to be better. But that's really, if we can just step back and forget ourselves completely and just focus on, okay, what's best for this person right now, is best we can discern, we'll have more peace. We'll be able to give more peace. We'll be better. But we so often think of ourselves. And Mary, if you're listening, I'm not picking on you, because we're all completely guilty of this. We do it all the time because we want to be better. And and that's part of the problem with how Christianity is shared to the world, in terms of, be moral, be pure, be this, be that. It's all, we kind of communicate it sometimes with a self-focus, as opposed to what really makes you a Christian. Well, first of all, you have to believe what the creed says. And what makes you a Christian is not identifying as one, it's doing it. It's living the sacramental life. It's like saying, if I identify as an audiologist, therefore I am one. No, you're one because you did all the work to be one. All right, I'm not. Doesn't matter what I think. It's just, and that's the nonsense going on today. Complete nonsense. People think if I just think something, that's what it is. Nope. You gotta do practice. And what happens with practice? You mess up, right? I mean, you all the athletes we admire, they put in a monotonous routine, right? Or musicians, or just pick somebody who we admire that does something. They're willing to have such sacrifice to achieve the top of their craft, right? That's the exact type of thing we need to bring to our prayer life, our church life, right? That singular focus to be one with Christ, because it builds on itself, right? The more we do that, the more we love others rightly around us. It's almost like if I could capture prayer in a formula, I'd have something that showed like compound interest or something. It just builds. And
that's where the thankfulness in our prayers allows us to perceive our difficulties as an opportunity to hone ourselves and our skills and our soul and our mind.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to pray with thanksgiving. I mean, Eucharist, right? Our whole being is centered on thankfulness, a thankful response to God. And so Paul's not saying, don't bring your request to the Lord. He's saying, bring your request to the Lord. The Lord wants you to. But there's an order of things, right? We seek Christ first for the relationship with him. When we bring our request, it's with thanksgiving, and sometimes I guess think of a personal situation you're in now or whatever. It may not be the most pleasant thing, but you come to the Lord with thanksgiving. It's almost like a prayer. Lord, I don't know why these things are happening. I don't know what the outcome should be. I know for this day, I thank you because I know you're at work in my life and her life and his life, doing something with all of us. Sometimes we can perceive it, sometimes we can't. We thank you for it and get us through the trouble of this day. Something like that. I mean, it's just it's not that hard.
To kind of sync some of the stuff together, if one has that Thanksgiving or call it maybe a grateful heart,
Mm.
then one would generally espouse love. One would espouse love.
Because the more grateful you are, the more loving you are, right? Go ahead, Mike.
It's your example with the athlete. How many times did he have to fail to keep going? And that failure is part of success. I mean, you can't have success without the failure.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Be thankful for your failures. I mean, no one wants to be a sinner, right? No one, but somebody called me yesterday actually, and I've been working with this person on a certain thing this person's been struggling with, and this person's been good for a week, and I was like, that's great. I said that's wonderful, and that's every day you struggle is wonderful. I said, however, I want to prepare yourself when you have the next setback. Don't undo in your mind all the good struggle. You say to yourself, I had 6 good days, now I had a bad day, now it's time to have another good day. You get up, right? And so and that's where I think this is where it gets back to ego in the sense of human perfectionism. We elevate ourselves in our thought, whether we do that consciously or not, but we're almost saying to ourselves, I should be better. I shouldn't fall at all. Well, no. But if we focus rightly, the falls will be less and less. If we keep focusing on ourselves, the falls will keep recurring. And we've all been there, right? How many times I know I have. Has anybody ever just struggled with a sin in their life and tried to overcome it through willpower? And if you're particularly strong mentally, you become more self-congratulatory the more days that go on that you beat it, right? As opposed to the weaker person who
Stop it, you're talking about me.
the weaker person who figures it out sooner because they fell quicker, right? Like the sinner today, not the strong Pharisee that did everything right but was totally self-focused and ego. Madam President, feel for your struggles. I just assume it's got to be something like that. Our president of our parish council, who's a faithful attendee of this class, just walked in, but
For a third time.
but there's going to be many Sundays like this. Madam President, may I talk to you for a moment? So we lift you up in prayer.
I think that's also and everybody's kind of touched on this too. Select your community. Find people that you can be, who will help you and who think like you do. And I that's really very helpful to what you're doing with your friend or colleague or this person. We all need to help one another.
Yeah, and that's so important. I mean, it's obviously
not just to look to help, but it is actually, as Elizabeth said, it's to get. It's
built that way. You give, you get. You don't seek to get, but you get anyway because you give. Yeah, it's self-evident on the surface, but I think what gets lost, at least I have to remind myself again and again. We, especially in the Western world where there's a lot of this, it's just between me and God creeps into our way of being, and we forget in His image and likeness. I'll say it again. He created us as His imagers to bear His likeness. Most of our experience of God is through other people. The body of Christ. Christ's body is spread out among all of us, and that's how He works, right? Most of us, I don't think, have had a vision of Christ directly in the sense of like you would imagine, like Christ appearing. It's more of the vision of Christ through the love of another person, right? The selfless giving of another person that's Christ-like, or someone is so filled with the Spirit. It's things like that, and I think that's where I did a podcast years ago called The Liturgy of Human Need, and there's plenty of people that have said it better than me, but I'm reminded that life is you have to go again. So, life is liturgical by nature. That's one of the beauties of our church or other churches that have still maintained a liturgical framework. And so if we understand the liturgical aspect of life, it's not just the divine liturgy, but how it's almost like a concentric circle that we come to the divine liturgy, but the rest of life is liturgical. Fellowship, worship, veneration, seeing God's everywhere present and fills all things. I think this false divide we have sometimes of secular versus sacred or whatever, that's just kind of holds us back a little bit until we realize that sometimes human need is the most liturgical thing you can do, even if it means you have to miss a divine liturgy potentially, right? Because there's a human need that you encounter that demands love, and that's your liturgy at that moment, right? Don't people can jump on me when I say things like that. I'm not saying skip church, just to be clear. For anybody that's really, I'm just saying there are some circumstances that, just like Christ, he never treated anybody's interruption. He dealt with what was ever in front of him. That's the example he set for us. So, can someone lower the heat, or is everybody still? Just turn it back.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay. If it gets cold, put it back up. I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable. Let me. So we talked about prayer. We've talked about love. Has anybody had an experience that they would say surpasses understanding? It doesn't have to be some grand thing. This could be a momentary thing. But anybody ever had something like that? Anybody want to share?
I shared it in here before, but I'm happy to share again. But almost exactly 2 years ago, because today's the 5th, so about a week and a half off of 2 years ago, I was, in the hospital post surgery with my guts on the operating table. Got a really bad fever, and it was high. It was like over 105, and I think it was almost delusional. And I was thinking, all right, Lord, this is it. I'm not gonna walk out of here. But it was, precisely when I was at my weakest, and I think that was probably the weakest moment of my life, that I felt other people's prayers sustaining me and lifting me up, because I had requested prayers and had received them. And I'd never felt anything like that before or since.
It surpassed just like a normal feeling. There was something
Yes.
you understood.
Yeah,
thing
there was
was going on.
something
Yeah,
otherworldly.
otherworldly. Yeah.
That was because I thought I was drifting off and thought that I was at the end. And then it was, at that precise moment that I could just feel something come over me and lift me up. And the thing that I felt was to start thinking, the thoughts that were going through my heart and my head were all the people that told me that they would be praying, and I started seeing different people. And so that kind of led me to believe that it was the prayers that were sustaining me. And I think they did.
Too. I've heard that.
And it was quite the moment. It's just it's hard to totally put into words, but I just felt the spirit lifting me up when I needed it the most. And what I was seeing was different people, whether it be family members, friends, even saw some people I didn't even know. Saw faces.
But at that moment in time, you felt like extreme peace
Yes.
Yeah. We get those.
from the love.
I was, I don't know if anybody read the book Surprised by Joy, C.S. Lewis. So he has one great story in there. It's so simple too. He had lost his mother young, and one thing led to another. He became agnostic, bordering on being an atheist. And then J.R.R. Tolkien and Hugo Dyson had a long conversation with him one night, and he started changing his thinking based on that conversation. But he was still struggling to get to the point of believing in Christ. He started, okay, there's God out there, but he kind of had more of a deist mentality. But he talks about how he got on this bus. He said, I got on the double-decker bus. When we set out, I did not believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. They were going to the zoo. When we reached the zoo and got off, I knew he was. So that always stuck in my head, but it was very, he said, no fanfare, no lights flashing, no. But I remember a couple of years ago when I thought everything was falling apart in life. I remember I went out for this walk like I always do, same walk I've taken a million times. The bottom of the hill, I was despondent. By the time I got to the top, it was okay. I don't explain. I just knew everything was going to be okay. I didn't know anything was going to work out. I had no prediction of the future. It still could have gone all south on me, but I just went from the bottom of the hill, messed up, to the top of the hill. Okay. All would be well. Julian of Norwich, all was going to be well. it wasn't quite like your experience, but it was just a peace, right? I held on to that peace the rest of the walk. And some of it's still with me. I mean, there's different things, but does anybody else have experiences like that? Or you don't have to share, you don't want, but I'm just throwing it out there because shared experience is usually the most powerful teacher of all.
Well, much simpler for me in that a bike ride, for instance, I'll start out, I use the bike ride to just get rid of my, you kind of stress and like there'd be a peace. And I feel like peace at the bike ride, I can't explain a specific situation, but that's how it works to me.
Yeah. I think if we really just really think about it and just calm ourselves, we realize that God's peace is all around us all the time. And sometimes it's in a very significant way, like with Stephen and his operation and your health. Sometimes less significant, like in mine, and sometimes I don't mean insignificant, but you're just doing your normal routine. You're just going for a bike ride, but there's something about that oneness that happens to you that's beyond just emotion and feeling. There's a sense, and it's probably because if we're living an active prayer life and we're growing, we start to see and experience those things in greater measure and capacity, depending on how God made us as individual persons, right? So I think these three experiences are all very different. One's not greater than the other, but it's just different. It's just to the measure of who we are at that point in time and how God built us, right? I think.
To that point, as many times when I pray when I'm bike riding.
Well, after what you did on your bike, you need to pray more.
Yeah, I know.
You had a bike accident. Yeah. And then you ruined her peace.
What can I say?
You got a little full of your piece, and I'm going to step up the
I'm full of peace.
full of piece. Yeah.
I think, Michael, in the beginning, you talked about peace and yet struggles in life. And I think we need to separate the two because a lack of struggle is not the same as peace.
No, I agree with you. That's a great point. There's actually a lack of struggle is almost a false peace, right? I mean,
Yeah, Christ promised us that if we are of him, we will struggle and we'll suffer. And so that we need to be thankful for, in a sense, and use that to shape our attitude and our approach. And we will struggle until our last dying breath.
yeah, that's a fantastic point, and that's really one of we get to a place of spiritual maturity where we really understand and are able to experience the cross the way, because he didn't, suffering is not alleviated right now, but he's there with us in it. And then he promises us something, that if we just bear our cross, of course. And where do we tend to fall off the wagon with that? It's when it becomes, like, why me? Or yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but yet he says so many things that if we really pay attention, maybe I'm speaking for myself sometimes because it's just like the rest of you, I'll read and then something just hits me. But he talked about, I love this one, which kind of bugs me because he kind of sanctifies nagging. But remember the persistent widow with the judge? And I was like, he's blessing nagging, which really, because I don't react to
Explains
nagging.
everything now.
Yeah, it explains a lot, right? Be careful or you will lose your peace. Okay. But yet what he says in that parable, he's explaining, he says, God will avenge his elect quickly. You're like, quickly? Right? Think about it. Don't we feel sometimes our suffering is endless, right? But yet, from God's perspective, it's quick, right? And I think, again, I'll speak for myself, and you can decide if it's a shared experience or if Michael's delusional. Those kind of things help me because I say to myself, okay, well, from my perspective, this is dragging out, right? But from God's perspective, it's not. And there's something in here beautiful for me, for others, if I can just have the patience and the self-control and the fruits of the Spirit. And how do we get there? Well, we get there through the sacramental life. And how do we grow in the sacramental life? We slowly, little by little, orient our hearts rightly. Two hands went up at the same time.
There's an epistle reading that we read often in church, and it's 2 Corinthians. But I think of it a lot, and it says, "We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. And when I'm not having a good day, I say, yes, I am crushed.
And it's your fault. But yeah, the church in its wisdom, that reading is for certain saints, so we actually encounter, if you read the daily readings, you'll read that, I don't know, 5-6 times a year, more than that maybe. But it's a great reminder, because we do feel crushed and perplexed, all those things. And
So I was just going to say that we do suffer continuously, right? And we will always bear our burden, some of us continuously. But what I found with my children, when I try to comfort them, is that even before I ask them to pray about things, is that in any struggle, when I ask them to I try to say, find 3 things that you're grateful about, even in this suffering. And that when we find things that we're grateful about, even in those most painful things, that burning pain that we have is sort of like immediately extinguished when we can see God at work in our lives. And so, and we can pray with gratitude, and we can pray. There's something magical about gratitude. And I feel like we can pray easier, and we can grow in our relationship with God. And there's just something, it's like pouring water on a fire,
it's the core of who God is. That's why the Eucharist, Thanksgiving, it's the core. So when we're doing that, we're closest to our human nature, is closest to God, to God's nature. I think I've said it here before. One of the things I do in my prayer is always, at some point in my morning prayer, I begin very early with thanking the Lord for things from the previous day. It's going to be small things. It can be not getting yelled at by my wife, or not, my daughter coming home safe in the car, or, whatever. Just thinking, And I have found, and I did it because some very wise person talked about gratitude. I forget, but anyway, what I realized over the years of doing that, it does cultivate in you. You don't have to do it exactly that way, but just, I found, for me at least, it created conditions in me that when I did start encountering rougher stuff, I was better prepared. I just did a podcast. I will be out the next couple of days, I think. But I talked about, it's what you do with the spaces in between. Father D always says we live from Pascha to Pascha, and I said on the podcast, I think we live from crisis to crisis, right? And it's in between the crises what we're doing on our daily basis, cultivating a thankful heart that actually prepares us when these things come out of the blue. You're better prepared, and you react better being defined by more loving and less self-involved, and not losing your peace, or not losing it as much, because you're just prepared. And the core of that is thankfulness. So, John,
just if I can offer 1 or 2
please.
comments. One, first of all, one of the inspiring ways that many Sunday mornings begin here at St. George's, when I encounter Father Tim, and I ask him how he's doing today, and he says, well, I'm vertical. and it's a humorous way of emphasizing something that we need to be very, very grateful for, that I've learned to incorporate into my own prayers. And that is to thank Christ for the fact of my very existence. Everything that we talk about, we can only talk about because we actually exist spiritually and physically. That's the beginning of everything in my life and in everyone's life. So I make sure that I'm grateful for my existence, and then everything else, Pascha to Pascha, crisis to crisis, all fits into that. But if I don't exist, there's nothing there, right? So that's where I begin, and that's where my gratitude, Ellen, to your point, is also centered. And I thank Christ every morning for the fact of my spiritual and physical existence.
That's a great way to put it. It's right. It's, we thank him for that we exist, because before you were in the womb, I knew you, right? He chose for us to exist. Imagine that.
And we take it to a larger perspective, and we're grateful for the gift of creation, of existence of all. fact that all of us exist, that this universe
Mhm.
exists, and that I'm gifted to participate in it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I think it's a wonderful way to put it. Very powerful.
Right. Well, and actually, all of us have problems in our lives, right? And I think that if you can look at the good in the tough situations, then you're going to be able to lean into those problems and work them out. Because so many people just avoid problems, and real leaders and real people positive people, actually work problems out
Mhm.
instead of avoiding them.
Yeah.
And so if you can be grateful about the good things, then you're actually going to lean into them and make positive change happen.
All right. Well, I've run out of things to say. I don't know if anybody else has anything else. All right. Well, thank you. I think just go ahead. Yeah, please.
How do we learn to avoid problems? Do you think that's taught? Do you think
You can't.
is that,
It's a
You
human
won't.
condition.
I that's really
I think it is taught to an extent.
I think, I mean, look at the cocaine consumption in the United States of America. Surely that's avoiding a problem or a whole lot of problems. So I'm wondering, how do we, because a small child doesn't know avoid problems. It's, oh, there's a puddle, splash.
Right.
I think culturally, with the focus on entertainment, pleasure, leisure, whatever, these disproportionate focuses take us away. Maybe not. Maybe the intent isn't to not teach, but the effect is that
So the secular life.
secular life, not the avoidance of look how we regard age sometimes and death or whatever. We don't. It does breed a little bit of a softness we have culturally, that when we really do have problems, real problems, maybe to Ellen's point, the knee-jerk reaction is to try to rationalize them away, or just don't focus on them, avoid them as if they're going to go away on their own, or do things. It just makes it worse. So yeah, I think there is, to some degree, I don't know if it's, anyway, go ahead.
What I was going to say is, it seems to me we live in a very reactive society instead of a proactive. So we have services out there for rehab, but we ignore a lot of mental health before that time, right?
Yeah.
We look for the pill to fix a problem instead of looking at the counseling to work through the problem, because the proactive behavior is longer and requires
And
more
painful.
dedication, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's working at the root of a problem, whereas the pill can take away the pain, right? So it's the quick fix. However, is the quick response good for the long run?
Well, Maria hinted at
No,
it.
it isn't.
Maria hinted at it earlier. What did Christ say? By patience, one English translation, by patience you will possess your souls. Another legitimate English translation is by patience you will save your life. Right? So I think another thing that probably happens, it seems to me at least, is that the more we've gone down this path of instant gratification, instantaneous, we've actually created conditions of a lack of patience, quick fixes, anxieties, because everybody expects, you think about it, all these devices where someone feels they can reach you, someone's using that device, and depending upon the ego they bring to the use of the device, they may actually expect you're going to respond right away because you're their beck and call, right? And so then you get anxiety about it because you're trying to avoid it, and you're seeing all these messages piling up. It's a vicious cycle, and all of that I think leads to these conditions where, these are some tangential connections. I think we could weave a tapestry here of stuff that contributes to a lack of peace, contributes to the things that go against what we know is peace breeding, if you will, thankfulness, patience, less, away from the selfie mentality to the other mentality, all these things. So I think what it requires of us, especially as Orthodox Christians, is still have this beautiful treasure of the sacramental life. Well, unalterated, undeterred, that if we just avail ourselves of it, we can be His light. Not that we're so special, not that it makes us better, but we have a beautiful opportunity to grow and be His light. He wants us to be His light. He says, "Let your light shine before men." It's not because of our egos; it's because, again, we're imagers. He wants us to share each other's light, and that's one of the things I'm most thankful about is just this beautiful faith we have. I didn't talk too much about beauty today, even though it was in the title, but think about how Russian Orthodoxy started because of beauty, right? Everything gets back to once you have these encounters with the Lord and it's not just the peace, but they go together, the beauty of it, right? And then you can share it because you can share it because you start to become it. So it's not like you're consciously saying, oh, I'm going to go share. You're sharing just by becoming more like him and seeking the relationship. So that's something to be thankful for, if nothing else, I think. So, all right. I thought I ran out of stuff to say, but you guys kept egging me on. So, and we're going to end here. Duty calls. So thank you for a beautiful Sunday, beautiful discussion. And God willing, we'll be back next week and we'll continue to go until I think our next scheduled break is the Sunday of Orthodoxy, which I think is March 5th. So God bless everyone, and we will